here from Painted Ladies Pastry, and today we will be decorating this watermelon on a stick sugar cookie using a thinner toothpaste consistency royal icing. I have that here in several colors, and you'll also need a palette knife or something similar, and then some parchment for a parchment overlay. Let's begin by using our tan colored toothpaste consistency icing to pipe the handle of our watermelon popsicle. I'm piping on a thin layer of this icing. It doesn't have to be perfect because we are now going to be using our palette knife. You can really use any knife or tool that will allow you to scrape the icing, and just run that tool over the surface, wiping off any excess. I want to even the royal icing out and then also add a little bit of great texture. Using the sharp edge of my palette knife, I'm scraping the edges. For the body of the watermelon slice, I'm using the same toothpaste consistency royal icing in a range of colors. I have a few different tones of red here for the body of the watermelon, and then a couple of greens and a white for the rind. I also have a piece of parchment that I have cut out. This is just a regular unbleached parchment paper. I used the cookie itself as a template and cut this out. Once we pipe the icing onto the cookie, we will be using the parchment as an overlay. So let's begin. Starting with my darker green royal icing, I'm piping the rind. Piping a double layer of this darker green. And then with my lighter green, piping a thin layer. And then for the second layer, I'm adding some inconsistent piping. And then right below that, I'm going to do the same thing with the white. So instead of a straight line, I'm just piping an inconsistent line. Below that, I will move on to my reds. So I have my lightest red, will be the majority of the red that I pipe down. To add color variation, I am piping this inconsistently across the body of the watermelon, like so, and then going in with a little bit richer of a red to fill in those gaps. Okay. So now we've piped our watermelon. We'll take our parchment overlay, set it on top of the slice, and using your finger, make sure that that parchment overlay is touching all parts of the royal icing that you just piped down. I can see some air bubbles trapped underneath, and that's totally fine. That's going to help us with our finished texture. Okay, so I have my parchment fully covering the recently piped royal icing. I'm gonna pick my cookie up just to make it a little bit easier here. Using my small palette knife, I'm swiping that palette knife along the edge of the cookie to clean up the sides. Wipe off my excess, and then getting the other side. So now we will let the royal icing dry with the parchment on top for roughly 15 minutes. You may need to wait just a little bit longer depending on your climate. The short wait time is for two reasons. The first is we used a toothpaste consistency icing versus a flood, so it will dry a little bit quicker. The second reason we're only leaving it on for 15 minutes is because we want to create some nice unfinished texture. So let me show you. If I were to leave the parchment on for longer than 15 minutes, we would get that nice cement finish, but I want more of a textured finish and not quite as matte, smooth of a finish. I also want to use that parchment to help me blend some of my color. So we'll wait 15 minutes and I will show you what it looks like when we pull that parchment off. After about 15 minutes, we will test the top just to see if it's the right consistency. So you can see it's pulling away some of the icing, which is what we want, but not all of it. So we'll start from the rind of the watermelon and gently peel the parchment away, pulling it towards the tip of the watermelon. And you can see again that that parchment is pulling off some of the icing. That's what we want. You can see that because of the direction that we pulled the parchment, we got this really nice texture in the watermelon that mimics that cut fruit slice look. We'll let this dry without the parchment for about 30 more minutes and then add a few small details and then we'll be all done. Let's move on to adding the final details to our watermelon slice. That includes the seed and just a little bit of color and texture on the watermelon and the watermelon stick. So for the seeds, I'm using an off-white and a black. And the parchment overlay, when you pull that off, it leaves a few naturally occurring kind of air pockets in the surface of your texture here. So I'm going to use those air pockets and fill the watermelon seeds in those pockets. So I'm adding a couple of off-white seeds and then I'm adding a black seed as well. And add one more down here in this pocket. This is that same toothpaste consistency icing. I'm gonna let this set for just a minute and then I will use my wood clay tool to give them a little bit of shape. I'm just flattening that a little bit and rounding it so it has the appearance of a flatter seed. We've added our seeds and this cookie would be good to go as is, but I do want to add a little bit of dry dusting to the handle and a little bit of paint to the cookie itself to give a little bit more dimension and detail. Another thing that I want to share with you, so the royal icing that has stuck to the parchment when you pull it off, once that's dry, I peeled this one off of a previous parchment and it creates a really cool icing transfer that's really textured on one side and then nice and matte on the other. So you could even build up more texture if you wanted to on your watermelon slice by layering some of this texture. So for example, I could add it here, hide one of those seeds almost as if it was buried in the surface of the watermelon, and then just break off a few pieces and add those on. So that's one way to get a little bit of additional texture, and I would just use some royal icing to adhere that on. Next, I'm adding a little bit of Poppy Paint Super Shine to the seeds. Using my Sugar Art Elite Dust in Chestnut, which is a slightly darker tone than our handle here, I will be dry dusting in some texture using, this is my Borderlands Bakery texture brush. So just getting a little bit of that powdered color and again, a slightly darker shade. Tap off the extra and then use that brush to work the color in. This gives us color variation, makes it a little bit, gives it the look of wood grain, and it also adds just a little bit of extra texture. I'm finishing it with just a little bit of white. So while I have my white Elite Dust out, pouring a little bit into my lid or a palette, diluting it with just a little bit of water. And I'm going to use this to just paint in a little bit of extra detail. Sometimes these watermelons have some veining along with a really great texture. So I'm adding some lines. Now I'm wetting my brush with mainly just water at this point. Patting it dry on my paper towel and then just using my wet brush to blend in that color. I want it to look more natural. So again, just a damp brush blending in that color. This is why I love mixing my Elite colors with water, because it gives me more flexibility to lay some paint lines down and then use more water to either erase those lines or blend them in. And the last little detail will be a richer green. This is Holly Elite Dust by the Sugar Art. And again, a little bit of that powdered color diluted with water. I like working with a thin paste consistency and then running that color along the very top. Once I've applied that darker green color, again, I'm rinsing my brush, getting it damp with water, not too damp. There's still a little bit of color in the brush, but that's fine. And then using my damp brush to blend the color in. So we're all done. We've added all of the final details to really elevate this watermelon cookie to the next level. Those details include a dry dusting on the textured handle, a little bit of paint, both in green and white, on the surface of the watermelon, some seeds that we applied Poppy Paint Super Shine to, and then we even added a little royal icing texture transfer overlay here. Thank you so much for decorating along with me today. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor and like it and subscribe for more decorating videos coming soon.